chilling murders that shook Northeast Ohio.
He just said there's a body, and I said, oh my God, I'm calling the cops.
A mom and her 2 college-age daughters found dead in their suburban Ohio home.
Taylor, Kylie, and Susie we haven't heard from any of them. I tried their phones, and they all went straight to voicemail, and all their cars are there.
A horrific crime scene with so many clues left behind.
I wish I would have opened the door, because I cannot see it.
A killer on the loose, striking again just a day later, murdering a couple returning home from vacation.
I just stopped by my dad's house to check on him, and I think he and his wife might be dead.
And a standoff ending his streak of violence. What does it take to catch a killer? I'm Sara Goldenberg, and you're listening to Dark Side of the Land. I've covered this criminal case for years. In this podcast, we take you inside the case file. You'll find out the killer's connection to his victims, how investigators solved all 5 murders, what it took to get a killer to confess, and why 5 years later, the fallout is not over, with the suspect's conviction on the line.
I wish I would have opened the door, because I cannot see it.
June 11th, 2017. A grisly discovery on Ridge Road in North Royalton, a leafy suburb of about 30,000 people less than 20 miles south of Cleveland. 42-year-old Suzanne Taylor and her daughters, Taylor and Kylie Pfeiffer, found dead in their home by Taylor's boyfriend, Dale.
I found it very strange. The house was silent, the lights were on, and all the cars were in their exact spots.
Their small white house, partially covered with ivy, was tucked behind tall trees off a busy road. Inside, a nightmare had taken place. Before we explain how Dale wound up here at this moment, we need to rewind the clock to nearly 30 hours before Dale's discovery, the last day Taylor and Kylie were seen alive. It was a hot, lazy summer afternoon, a Saturday, when Taylor and Kylie Pfeiffer set out from their home to do some shopping at a nearby mall in Strongsville. Taylor and Kylie were counting down the days to back to school, both of them going to college not too far from home. Taylor, 21 years old, would head back to Kent State as a senior. She loved softball and coaching kids. At 18, Kylie was going to be a sophomore at Bowling Green State University, pursuing her dream to become a forensic investigator.
I could kick myself for what happened.
This summer day would later come to haunt Scott, who had been dating Suzanne. They had just broken up after getting back from a vacation, but Scott still cared for her and was still talking to her. He had no idea this was the last time he would ever speak to Suzanne again. Scott's timeline of what happened that Saturday was key, and as one of the closest people to Suzanne and one of the last people to speak with her before she died, he starts out for investigators as a possible suspect. And he's not the only one. Dale, Taylor's boyfriend, is under the microscope too.
So here's kind of the concern. You were one of the last people, your kids, to be over there. So it's really important. I want to know what you saw, who you saw over there, what was normal, what wasn't normal.
With his attorney by his side, Scott, in his 40s, walked a North Royalton police detective and an FBI agent through his day. They sat at a round table in a small room with white walls and a one-way window glass, like in those interrogation rooms you see on TV shows. Scott tells investigators more about Suzanne. She was a real estate appraiser, and they had dated for 6 months and were looking at buying a house together. But they had some disagreements over the last few weeks, which led to their breakup.
We were so much better face to face. You know, we just got along, meshed, we talked well.
Here's how Scott says the day of the murders unfolded. One by one, he brings up red flags he only noticed in hindsight.
The last text I ever got from her was at 1:37 p.m. I texted her and I said, "How's your day been?" At 1:39, she replied, "Sleeping, I'll text later." And there's a text that you have to pull over to the side, you can see the times. For her to say sleeping, I'll text later, she did not nap. She was not a napper, she hated naps. And that should have set off a trigger in my mind.
That's a big observation for investigators who take notes on the texts on Scott's phone. Around 2:30 that Saturday afternoon, Scott says Kylie called him asking him to help her and Taylor, who were stranded at the mall.
They had a flat tire there, and they said, can you come and help? And she said that she had talked to her mom, and her mom said to call me. That's your next unusual thing. Her mom was very independent, and she hated counting on my help. So for her to say, call Scott, especially when I'm in Medina and she knows that I have my kids, should have set something off for me again, and I missed it.
Scott says around 2:45, Kylie called him back and said someone had helped them with the tire, a good Samaritan. But Scott was already on the way and got to the mall soon after at 3. He says he talked to mall security and loaded up their bad tire. About 10 minutes later, Suzanne called.
She said, don't get the tires fixed, send the girls home, I'm not feeling well, don't come. And the don't come should have set off another flag that if I'm that close, she should know that I'm probably going to come.
At this point, Scott was behind the girls in his car. They were driving their car with the donut tire on. Then Taylor called Scott, and he didn't notice anything off at the time.
I said, how's your mom feeling? She said she's sick. And Kylie said, she's not any sicker than she normally is, which is not anything. And that's the next alarm.
Scott says Suzanne told him she was sick, but Kylie said she wasn't. After that, Taylor and Kylie drove off. He assumed they were going home, and he ran some errands with his kids, picking up some flowers for Suzanne. He texts Suzanne around 4:30 as he heads over to her house.
And I told the kids, I said, Susie's not feeling well, let's buy her flowers and take them over. So we bought her flowers, and then we drove over, and we pulled in, and then the kids and I all got out and went up to the door, and I usually just walk in, and it surprised me because all the cars were there, plus George's van was there.
Usually their door is open since there's no air conditioning in the house, but he was surprised because it was locked. And you may be wondering, who's George? And why is his van at the house? George Brinkman was Suzanne's friend from back in high school. It wasn't unusual for him to visit, but Scott notices how quiet it was. He didn't hear their dog barking inside the house. Still, he leaves the flowers, a dozen red roses, on the doorstep for Suzanne, then packs the kids back into the car, texts Suzanne a few more times, and heads home. Looking back on it, the guilt really breaks him down.
I was just like looking around going, this doesn't seem right to me, and again, I should have done something.
As he tells his story, Scott keeps showing investigators his cell phone with texts and calls to Suzanne, backing up everything he says. In hindsight, he points out a few things he didn't notice at first. One, Taylor's social media went dark on Sunday, the day after he went to their house. He says she always made it a point to post every day to keep up her Snapchat streak, but on Sunday, her streak ended. 2, the dog didn't bark when he knocked on the door Saturday, and that was really strange. And 3rd, if George was visiting.
When she has company over, she doesn't shut the door behind him and lock the door behind him. That is, I have never seen her do that.
Scott never heard from Suzanne again. That's when we go back to Sunday, around 7:30 at night, when he hears from Taylor's boyfriend Dale, who was at Suzanne's house, concerned.
And he said, have I seen or heard from him? And I said, I haven't talked to him since yesterday afternoon.
He hadn't been able to get a hold of anyone, and the front door was locked.
Okay, Dale, do you understand that before we ask you any questions, it is my duty to advise you of your rights?
Dale describes to police how the whole day of the murders unfolded. Another detective joins the undercover cop and FBI agent. Dale looks somewhat shaken, but he keeps his composure.
I'd like to help as much as possible.
First, they check to see how he's holding up.
Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. It's been rough. I've run out of tears, so...
Dale takes them back to Saturday, the day of the murders, when he was still at work in the afternoon.
Taylor texted me. The last text I got was a movie trailer of something that we're supposed to see at the drive-in movie that night. And I couldn't. I called her. I have the call logs if you want to see them. I called her about 10 to 15 times between that day and the next day, and texted her, including her mother and her sister, and couldn't get a hold of any of them, which was very strange.
He says he went home, assuming Taylor had gotten in trouble, and her mom took her phone away. The next day, Sunday, he went to church and worked on his dirt bike and went riding.
And I thought it was very strange. I still hadn't heard, and I was continuing to call, so I decided to drive straight there, towed my bike and everything.
Sunday, just before 8 o'clock at night, Dale was standing at their front door. He says all of the cars were sitting in the same spots in the gravel driveway, and something wasn't right.
No one would answer, and the dog wasn't barking, which is very strange. So I circled the house. All the blinds were shut, all the windows were closed, to what I saw. And I was really concerned.
Usually, he said, their front door was unlocked.
It was locked, it was deadbolted, which is only done from the inside.
The warning signs were piling up, so Dale calls Scott and picks the lock. Knowing how it sounds, he tells investigators he works on home rehab projects with his dad. Still, this new detail piques their interest.
How long did it take you to open it?
3 seconds. I just slid in the pick and it opened right up.
Then Dale walked into their house. He hears the dog barking now from Suzanne's bedroom. He says that door wasn't usually closed.
I found it very strange. The house was silent, the lights were on. You could hear the AC running. It was kind of damp and had a musty smell. And I opened up the bedroom door and there was a comforter covering the entire bed.
That's when Dale discovered their bodies, covered by a brown comforter lying next to each other on Suzanne's 4-poster bed. It was obvious to him, even though he couldn't see them all, something horrifying had happened.
Kylie wearing a teal blue shirt, her arm and leg were hanging off the side of the bed. I knew that they were dead, at least one of them. The bed didn't look right. I assumed there were others there, but I couldn't bring myself to look, so.
He turned around and ran out of the house.
But I wish I wouldn't have opened the door, because I can't unsee it.
He tells Scott, still on the phone, he thinks Suzanne and the girls are all dead.
And I told him what was hanging out. He just went into a complete state of shock. He could barely speak. He couldn't understand what was going on. And
Scott, completely shaken, calls 911.
Okay, this is Southwest Dispatch. Do you know if he's waiting outside at the residence or is he still in the house?
I don't know. He just said there's a body, and I said, oh my God, I'm calling the cops.
The hardest part behind him now, Dale brings up George to police.
George Brinkman, I'm sure you also have his name.
He says he called Brinkman, a close friend of Suzanne's, on his way home after he found all 3 of the women dead. Dale said George was crushed by the news.
When I told him on the phone that they were all gone, he couldn't breathe, he couldn't talk. He kept going, no, 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 and he had to pull off the side of the road to finish talking with me. And it was a true, genuine state of shock, in my opinion.
Dale knew Brinkman's van had been spotted outside of their house. He says George told him he had tried to talk to Suzanne that day, but no one answered the door for about an hour. Detectives wondered if something was wrong, why didn't George Brinkman ever contact police? Dale offers to call him and puts his cell phone on speaker so cops can listen in.
Hey, George.
Hey,
How you hanging in there, man?
I can't do.
Dale asked George if anybody stopped by when he was at Suzanne's house that Saturday.
Nobody knocked on the door.
At like 4:30?
Means 4:30.
Scott said he rolled up about 4:30, and he said your van was there, but you weren't in the van.
What
And
the hell was that? Was that you?
that's my phone going off. People are texting me with condolences.
Oh.
That sound could have stopped the call short. It was one of the detectives' cell phones buzzing. But Dale kept his cool as investigators passed him notes with questions.
I'm just trying to get a timeline mentally for myself, you know.
I'm at the top of the list because I don't know if I was the last one to see them. What if I would have stayed and visited a little longer, but things have changed?
Dale hung up the phone with Brinkman, and investigators went over a few more things. I later interviewed Sergeant Floanne Ribicki and an undercover officer, both with North Royalton Police, about their investigation. We disguised the undercover cop's voice to hide his identity. These interviews became key in piecing together not just a timeline, but their main suspect.
Right, and we start every interview off knowing that this person could possibly turn into a suspect, but we try to start it off to try to get people comfortable, talk with us, and it kind of, depending on how they answer our questions, it evolves to what they become a suspect or if they get eliminated as a suspect.
Dale's story sounded true, and his willingness to help was another mark in his favor. 2.5 hours of questioning finally led to this.
Did you have anything to do with anything that went on over there?
No, I did not.
And investigators crossed Dale off their list of possible suspects.
Some of our big breaks came from Dale.
Still, something wasn't adding up when investigators compared Scott's story to George's.
I don't know, their stories are complete opposite.
But Scott had an alibi. His children were with him around the time of the murders. After 40 minutes of questioning him, the FBI agent made something clear.
You realize you're a witness, right? We don't... No, you're not a suspect, right?
For a moment, some relief, until minutes later, Scott put together the timeline too, realizing he may have been at Suzanne's house at the time of the murders.
Can you tell me what the time of death was? Was I there with my kids when this happened? Did they suffer?
What happened, Scott, was unthinkable. So the red flags that you talked about, you see them as red flags in hindsight now, but what happened was unthinkable.
With Dale and Scott crossed off the list as suspects, investigators are leaning towards someone else. Someone Suzanne called a close friend for years. Someone she opened up her own home to when times got tough. Thanks to Dale and Scott, a clearer profile of George Brinkman took shape for investigators. Scott says Suzanne always thought of George as just a friend, and their relationship went downhill when she and Scott were dating.
She said that he always had a crush on her. So she said that he would constantly ask her, how do I get a girl like you?
And now Scott was convinced.
I think George did it. I have no doubt that George did it. I think he's crazy. He just never seemed, he always just jumps to beat their fucking ass, no matter what, and it just like snaps.
The good old-fashioned detective work continued in the background as Sergeant Ribicki and the undercover cop on the case interviewed Suzanne's boss and family members and friends of Taylor and Kylie. Each person helped fill in that timeline a little more. Most people who could help were eager to give them any information they had. Sergeant Ribicki was the one who had to break the awful news to Taylor and Kylie's father, who was also Suzanne's ex-husband.
It's horrible. It's horrible. That's probably the worst part of the job, is dealing with the tragedy afterwards.
They also worked on tracking down Brinkman's distinctive van, and their suspicions about him grew when they couldn't get a hold of him on the phone.
I called him at first, and it sounded like someone picked up, and then they hung up.
Eventually, Sergeant Ribicki did get a hold of him. Brinkman said he was driving about an hour away. Ribicki said she would wait for him to come in for an interview. An interview, she didn't know then, would never happen. And something else made them focus on him as a suspect after their murders made the news.
They had told us everybody and anybody was there at the house, at the scene. Family members, friends. The only one that never showed up was George, and that was odd.
And at that point, it was, all right, George is our number one suspect.
I'm Sara Goldenberg, and you're listening to Dark Side of the Land. Where is George Brinkman, and could the murder of a couple 40 miles away be connected? It won't be easy to track down the killer. Detectives with North Royalton Police and special agents with the FBI know every second counts. A day after Dale found Suzanne, Taylor, and Kylie dead, this 911 call came into dispatchers from Lake Township in Stark County.
I just stopped by my dad's house to check on him, and I think he and his wife might be dead.
A couple just home from vacation found dead by their own son. Roberta and Rogel John, who went by Bobby and Jean, were 64 and 71 years old. They lived in a white split-level house with maroon shutters on Mount Pleasant Street. Neighbors were in disbelief.
I can't believe it, what happened.
It's just hard to comprehend because this is just a great, safe community.
Stark County deputies had heard about the murders in North Royalton, and a certain black van with a red stripe had been at this crime scene too. As they collected evidence and statements from witnesses, one person stood out to them as the main suspect.
Deputies have identified a suspect in this case. The suspect is George C. Brinkman, Jr.
Meanwhile, back in North Royalton, all signs also pointed to Suzanne's childhood friend, George Brinkman. Here's Sergeant Floanne Ribicki, again, detective on the case.
He was very much in love with Suzanne. And he had a very close relationship to Taylor. Weird relationship, it almost was, because it was very, very close. They called each other best friends, they had nicknames for each other.
The undercover officer said police had a bolo, be on the lookout, issued for George's van when they got a call from Stark County Sheriff's Office. This was now 2 days after Suzanne, Taylor, and Kylie had been murdered.
And this county advised us that they had a homicide in their county, and George Brinkman in his black van with a red stripe was at the top of their list.
I mean, it was like instantaneous. I basically hung the phone up, looked at our FBI tech agents and said, George Brinkman has his phone with him right now, so let's do it.
They pinged his phone, leading them to Brunswick, a 20-minute drive from North Royalton. That location hit too close to home for Sergeant Ribicki.
I remember it because it was my kids were playing baseball at the time at the ballpark, and that was in that 20-mile radius, and it really freaked me out.
They found Brinkman holed up at his friend Amy's house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. He was dog-sitting for Amy and crashing at her place some nights. But now, with police closing in, it was clear he wasn't going anywhere. Suddenly, an ordinary street turned into a massive police zone as the SWAT team set up.
There was like hundreds of us, and we were staging and getting ready to go to the house.
Amy came home and went inside, not realizing she's now caught in a standoff between Brinkman and police. U.S. Marshals walked by the open front door just as Amy passed by inside and whisked her away from the house to safety as Brinkman ran upstairs.
She appeared genuinely horrified, absolutely, in total shock over what was happening.
Detectives believe Amy was very close to becoming Brinkman's next victim.
In my mind, I 100% believe that he would have killed her.
They fill her in on the murders they're investigating, and Amy told them Brinkman had hurt his arm, blaming it on an incident at work.
Amy was piecing it together and said, "Are you trying to tell me that he had something to do with what happened in North Royalton to those 3 girls?" And I said, "That's what we're here to find out."
Police photos from inside Amy's house show Brinkman had made himself at home in one of the bedrooms while he was dog-sitting for Amy. Bags of snacks sat on the nightstand, along with a bottle of alcohol and his insulin needles for his diabetes. Brinkman had access to several guns piled up in the closet. Negotiators tried to talk him down as police surrounded the house.
And that's when George had a gun to his head and bottled liquor and kept us all at bay.
But what was his state of mind as you guys were trying to get him out of the house?
He wasn't admitting anything at that point.
And another twist to the story, during all of this, Brinkman was messaging a reporter from our news station on Facebook, Lacey Crisp. She later explained how it all started.
I reached out on Monday afternoon to George Brinkman because he's Facebook friends with all 3 North Royalton homicide victims. When I reached out to him, I did not know that he was a suspect.
That's right, she had no idea he was actually the lead suspect in the case. Lacey and George's Facebook messages are in the case file I got a hold of. They give us a look at Brinkman's state of mind. Just before 10 p.m., Brinkman messaged Lacey with the address he was at in Brunswick, saying, "Hostage situation. Please come. Cops came for me. I'm barricaded. No lies." She responds, "Get out of the house. Hands up." He says no, adding, "This is going to end up with me dead." At this point, our news station made the judgment call to contact police. Here's our general manager at the time, Eric Schrader, explaining why.
It's not easy for people used to impartially covering the news to become part of the news, but at the same time this decision was made, it wasn't clear Mr. Brinkman was alone in the house or if others were potentially in danger. To us, that meant our reporter needed to work with the police in an effort to keep everyone safe.
As the messages slowed down, Brinkman wrote to Lacey, "Just let everyone know that I would never hurt Sue or the kids. I love them too much." In all, 8 long hours passed by as negotiators tried to talk George down. And finally, police brought Brinkman out in his handcuffs Tuesday at 5:30 a.m., wearing no shirt and red shorts with his head hung low.
I don't know, I don't want to say he was suicidal because he was holding the gun to his head. He could have done it at any time, but he didn't. He was a coward. He'd rather take other people's lives than take himself, so.
But questioning would have to wait. It turns out all of those snacks Brinkman had been eating put him into a diabetic shock, and paramedics had to take him to the hospital. Prosecutors later alleged he did that on purpose. Eventually, he wound up at the North Royalton City Jail. Later that day, it was time to face the music.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you.
I'm Sara Goldenberg, and you're listening to Dark Side of the Land. It was just a short walk down the hallway to the North Royalton Police Department. 45-year-old George Brinkman, 6'2" and 165 pounds, with a shaved head and goatee and a cast on his right hand and wrist, sat down in an orange jumpsuit at a long conference table for an interrogation with FBI agents. It looked like the beige walls were closing in, but two windows let in some light from outside. Our investigative unit later got a hold of the entire video. It's hours and hours long.
I know. But I respect that. Thank you.
In it, two FBI agents started out by asking Brinkman about his background. He said he works odd jobs for a living, distributing phone books, fixing cars, watching dogs. He crashed at friends' houses like Suzanne and Amy's. Other times, he lived in his van. Then they asked him about the cast on his right arm.
This happened because of work Friday.
Okay.
I got angry, I got upset, and instead of hitting what I thought was a fake wall, was a real wall. Yeah, real wall wins every time.
Yeah.
Investigators would later find out he broke it when he punched Suzanne in the face. But that lie slides by for now, and they talk about Suzanne and her daughters.
I've known Sue since grade school. Always only been friends.
Okay.
And we knew, even back in high school, it would never work anything other than friends. Me and Taylor had this bond. It was ridiculous.
Her nickname, he said, was from Jurassic Park.
Well, she called me the Dino Man. Her name was Timmy from then on.
Saturday night, he said Dale called him with the news.
I should have been there for Saturday.
George looks upset, picking up his hand with the cast, about to slam it on the table.
Oh, just careful, man.
FBI agent Andrew Earl is asking most of the questions, and he's not wearing a dark suit like you might expect. Instead, he looks like he could be your neighbor, casual in jeans and a polo shirt, his arms covered in tattoos, downplaying his expertise as an experienced interrogator. He sits right next to Brinkman, who's now covering his head with his hands and shaking his leg. Agent Earl gets to the point, laying a photo of Suzanne and her daughters on the table in front of him.
I can tell that you were very close to them.
That's Kylie, that's Taylor.
George points to each woman crying. Agent Earl presses him, but gently.
Did you have anything to do with any of this? What happened to them?
We're gonna.
I had to ask that to anybody.
I know you're.
I can tell that's.
No.
Brinkman frowns at them, and they ask him to run through Saturday when he went to Suzanne's house. Investigators got Brinkman's phone when he was taken into custody, and text messages we got a hold of from the police case file showed George texted Suzanne the day of the murders, saying he really needed to come over and he had a surprise for the girls. He texted Suzanne, "I kind of hope the girls are not there at 1. Before he gets started talking, he pauses.
I'm sorry, but can I have a cigarette?
When that's shot down, he picks up his story. Brinkman says he pulled up the driveway and Taylor and Kylie were there.
And then they said something about wanting to go to the mall, so I gave him $20 to go eat. Say, hey, can you give me about maybe $2.30 to talk to your mom?
He says he brought cash for college for the girls to give to Suzanne.
And the one thing I did that morning, I stopped and withdrew $1,600 and put it in 2 envelopes, one for Kylie and one for Taylor.
He was going to skip town that day, but Suzanne changed his mind.
She convinced me that running away from my problems will never solve them.
Brinkman says she talked about going on a date that night, even though she had just broken up with Scott. But earlier that day, Suzanne told him in a text she wouldn't be dating for a long time.
Like I said, when she starts talking about her love life, I just kind of zone her out.
Brinkman says Taylor and Kylie got a flat tire, but someone helped them with it, and he saw them pull in the driveway when he was leaving around 4 p.m.
Yeah, I'm being blamed for it.
No, not being blamed for it. I'm going to ask you if you've anything to do with it.
Hell no. If I find the motherfucker who did it, I'm sorry. There ain't going to be no trial. You don't take Timmy from me. You don't take my best friend from me that I grew up with, or our other daughter. If I would have stayed 15, 20 minutes, another 40 minutes.
Nearly 2 hours into the interview, FBI agents string George Brinkman along.
See if I can find it. You know what I say, right? Okay?
But that's a no again, and they move on to the standoff.
And then Dale called me yesterday with his line of questioning, and I kind of knew something was up then.
Investigators try to make a breakthrough, building up a case that he was thinking of ending it all during the standoff at Amy's house.
I would retrieve a firearm. I wouldn't go to a window and put it to my head. I wouldn't sit there as a diabetic and just drink so much sugar that I put myself to a 460 blood sugar level.
I see how it looks. I see how it looks.
Here's what I'm getting at.
Brinkman starts shrinking into his chair as far back in it as he can get. It looks like the pressure is starting to crush him. He asks for a break.
George, I need a cigarette right now or I can't talk anymore.
But that will have to wait. Instead, Brinkman takes a polygraph. After waiting for the results, he finds out he failed the lie detector test.
It was considered inconclusive. Remember, something happened. Only you know the real truth of what happened.
The polygraph examiner presses Brinkman for more, but no luck. He just puts his head in his hands and clams up.
You have to respectfully ask to have a lawyer.
Left alone in the interrogation room, he starts mumbling to himself.
Something's no, this ain't right.
After hours and hours of questioning from the FBI, what will it take to make George Brinkman crack? And what was his motive? His shocking confession next. I'm Sara Goldenberg, and you're listening to Dark Side of the Land. George Brinkman is ready to shut down after that polygraph. It all could have ended here, but that's when he finally gets his smoke break out in the jail courtyard about 5 hours after first asking. FBI agents join him, but legally they can't talk to him about the case here without an official recording. Suddenly, Brinkman says something that brings them all back into the interrogation room.
Kind of said outside, just kind of spontaneously, and for the family's sake, you have the right guy, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say.
FBI agents take him inside and read him his rights again. Brinkman says Suzanne was home alone when he got to her house. That's when he starts to confess. A warning, what comes next is disturbing and graphic, but the details are important to solve the case.
Things were going fine, we were talking, and then I don't know what set her off. She just started going all batshit crazy. And then we started screaming and yelling and arguing. And then she got up in my face and I snapped.
So what happened next?
I took her in her bedroom and I threw her in her bed and told her, just shut the fuck up and chill out, you know? Just chill out. And she just wouldn't shut up. Unfortunately, that's when the girls walked in.
Brinkman says that's when he tried to walk away. But Suzanne told Taylor and Kylie he had attacked her, and they got angry and scared and started hitting him.
I just kept thinking, what the f***? I just got betrayed. You know, I didn't do shit. She's the one that snapped on me. And I wasn't going to hurt him. I was just going to tie him up and just walk away. Just so I didn't have to try to fight him anymore to get out the door. The dog was going crazy. Why? What did I say? What did I do? What did I do this time, you know?
Was she like tied up at this point?
Yeah.
What was she tied up with?
She had zip ties in the house.
So,
and then she broke through the first set. And then I used the duct tape she had in her house just to keep their hand. And I'm starting to panic. I'm like, oh crap, you know, now that they're tied up, once they get loose, they're gonna call the police and say, you know,
sure. Yeah.
And
George says Suzanne started kicking, and that's when he punched her in the face and wound up with the cast he's wearing now.
That's all I wanted was just to shut up. And I was like, you know what? She can't kick if she's laying on her stomach. I made them all turn over and lay on their stomach.
Were the girls?
They were
listening?
there too.
Were
They were
listening to you?
right there, yeah.
So they were listening to what you were telling them to do?
Yeah. And while she was laying on her stomach is when I took the knife to her. Taylor and Kelly started freaking out.
What were they freaking out? What happened with the knife?
Because I stabbed her mother.
Where?
Around the neck area.
Like? Did you stab her? Did you have the knife in your left hand or your right hand?
I think
Can you show me?
Stabbed her in the back and then she just wouldn't.
Like here?
Yeah, somewhere back here I think.
Okay.
And then I realized, oh, I really f***ed up. I kept telling them, don't look, please don't look, please don't look, you don't need to see that. I wasn't even thinking, I just stabbed.
3 or 4 times, Brinkman says he stabbed Suzanne. So many times, he couldn't remember.
She's like, Taylor, Kylie, I love you guys forever. And she's screaming it. And then, like I said, the girl started freaking out. I had no intention of even touching them. None.
FBI agents want to know what he did with the evidence.
I took the knife, the duct tape pieces, the zip tie pieces. Sorry, I was more concerned about getting out of there than anything else.
Where's the clothes that you had on?
In the garbage somewhere.
Did you grab that money when you left?
No.
You left it there?
Yeah, it should have still been sitting on the table.
But evidence photos we obtained from the case file show no envelopes with money Brinkman claims he left for Taylor and Kylie. And the flowers Scott left Suzanne on the doorstep were on the table, meaning someone must have picked them up and brought them inside. Who? That timing was crucial. Brinkman said he never heard Scott knock and he didn't remember seeing any flowers. As the FBI pressed for more details about the crimes, George's frustration begins to show.
What am I missing?
I'm asking you. I want to be fair.
I mean,
listen. Just because I'm asking some questions doesn't mean you're missing something.
No, I gotta.
It's now Wednesday at 12 a.m., more than 48 exhausting hours after the discovery of the bodies of Suzanne Taylor and her daughters. The FBI and North Royalton police decide that's enough for today, and agents lead Brinkman back to his jail cell.
It was a long day yesterday.
Hours later, they press for more details from Brinkman. How did Taylor and Kylie die? And what did he do after the murders? Police requested water meter readings and found water usage at Suzanne's house spiked from 5 to 8 on the night of the murders. His response?
I washed up a little bit in the kitchen because I had blood on me.
Brinkman paints himself as the victim before the murders.
I've done everything in the fucking world for you and your girls. What did I do to you to deserve this treatment? And I guess, you, you're a loser.
Then they revisit those crucial moments when Brinkman took the lives of all 3 women. A reminder this may be disturbing.
And all I wanted to do was just zip tie their hands and duct tape them and leave. That's all I wanted to do.
The FBI agent asks Brinkman how he got all of the women tied up to the bed headboard.
Do it to each other?
I have Kylie because she appears to be the calmest. Zip tie her mother and her sister.
Then Brinkman says he tied Kylie up himself.
I just stood there, was walking back and forth in front of the bed with a knife so they could see it.
After he stabbed Suzanne several times, he turned to the girls.
And the Taylor started freaking out. She said, you killed my mom, you killed my mom, you killed my mom. And I freaked out, I jumped on Taylor, and I put her face in the pillow.
As he suffocated Taylor, he said Kylie partially broke free and fought back.
Legs were taped, she was kicking and jumping all over the place. And I looked over and I saw a phone charger cord, and I just grabbed into it around her neck. And I kept it there till she stopped moving.
Autopsy results show these women went through hell. Brinkman stabbed Suzanne all over her body, from her head and neck down to her heels. Taylor and Kylie fought back. They had cuts and bruises on their bodies, and Kylie had been pulled from her ponytail. Brinkman covered them up with a comforter after he killed them. A mother and her 2 daughters dead, lying side by side. Their lives taken by the hands of a man who claimed to be their friend.
I would do anything to be able to go back and change things, but like you said, there's no time machine. I don't deserve to live.
Listen,
I don't deserve to live.
remember when I told you about forgiveness?
It's this technique throughout the interrogation, the gentle, understanding touch used by Agent Earl, that ultimately led George Brinkman to confess and gave the victims' families some answers, as hard to hear as they may be. After 2 days and more than 7 hours of questioning from the FBI, they have their guy. The undercover cop who worked the case says it was clear it wasn't the whole story, only some version of the truth.
And I don't think you're ever going to know why, and that's the only blank we can never fill in. He kept telling the girls that he was going to leave. He just wanted them to calm down. And I imagined that they believed him. How can you not believe him? How could you ever imagine that somebody that you know is going to kill you or harm you in any way?
But Brinkman's motive still wasn't clear. Here's Sergeant Rubicki's take.
Everybody was saying that we talked to, like Dale, Scott, they were all saying that he was very much in love with Suzanne. And he had a very close relationship to Taylor. Weird relationship, it almost was, because it was very, very close. They called each other best friends, they had nicknames for each other. As far as Kylie goes, she wasn't even a thought in his mind. He had an issue with women, either affection or whatever his issues were.
The heartache and tragedy of this case reached across the community, including to police themselves who worked on the case.
I mean, you have 2 daughters yourself as a mother. Was that just the hardest part?
Yep, that's what I think about all the time. Yep.
That's why you do your best to get justice for these families.
Yep, I think we did too. I think we did.
Next, on Dark Side of the Land, George Brinkman's confession continues. Find out what he says happened to Bobby and Jean John, his next victims. And the FBI questions what he bought at a Walmart right before his killing spree began. Plus, we'll hear from Suzanne's brother as he struggles to heal, and find out why, 5 years later, this story is not over, and Brinkman's conviction in one of the cases is on the line. I'm Sara Goldenberg. Thanks for listening to Dark Side of the Land.
Subscribe now for future episodes and find more Dark Side of the Land and photo galleries related to these cases at cleveland19.com.